Kaiju number 8 just revealed the little guy's insane origins, including Kafka's samurai ancestor, how Kaiju number 9 in the Meireki monster caused it all, plus the entire timeline. However, to make sense of all these crazy revelations, we've got to hit rewind, because all of this only happened due to the Meireki monster handing out L's left, right, and center, baby. With Kafka knocking on death's door, it's down to Hoshina and Narumi to have the ultimate tag team match against the strongest of all kaiju. What's mental though is that these two hate each other's guts. You see, 4 years ago when Hoshina was training, Narumi admitted to never liking him from the get-go, as he looked just like Soichiro, Hoshina's older brother and the captain of the 6th Division. And so that's when Narumi used his kaiju weapon to look at his body closer, realizing Hoshina's refined signal stream and how it's way above the rank that he was actually at. And so Narumi did the unthinkable. He invited Hoshina to join the 1st Division. He believed he was way too powerful to be in the 3rd, and he wanted this prodigy's talents amongst the strongest team there was. Now this came as a huge shock to Hoshina, as we must remember his entire upbringing was him being told that he would have no hope fighting kaiju due to his outdated close combat grounded fighting style. Something Mina saw not as a hindrance, but rather as a gift that would work perfectly with her. And so for that reason, he declined Narumi's offer, as Hoshina was determined to be the arms and legs of Mina Ashiro. This angered Narumi greatly, and to make matters even worse, Hoshina broke every single one of his close quarter combat records. Seriously, Hoshina handed him L after L. It was a generational humbling. However, Narumi has a chance to prove that he is that guy now in the battle against the Meireki monster. It's his turn to outshine Hoshina, as everyone cheers that their saviors have arrived. And I mean, who can blame them? Narumi has come in clutch with his Kaiju number 1 weapon, as remember, it can see the future and understands its opponent's moves before they make them, which is perfect for facing this kaiju whose attacks are instantaneous. But because it has to look at its target to do so, Narumi can predict where it will attack. Thus, if Hoshina wants to escape this battle alive, he's gonna have to match this level of power, as the two of them go straight for a joint attack. Now, what you've got to realize here is that when a captain class officer engages in combat at full release, the area is a designated danger zone to anybody with an unleashed combat power under 60%. That means even the likes of Leno Ichikawa, who was described as a prodigy, wouldn't be able to survive in this war zone. That's because the captain's combat power reaches the level of a Daikaiju, something capable of engulfing all other officers, spelling their end. But this rule applies even more so to Captain Narumi, as his Kaiju number 1 weapon wields the strongest combat power. As a result, there isn't an officer on Earth who can survive within a 100-meter radius of him, or at least that was the case. Enter Vice Captain Hoshina. He is so broken that he's able to perform his moves freely within Narumi's deadly domain. What's more is that despite hating his guts, Narumi is actually working with Hoshina, and quite frankly, they have to, because even Hoshina admits that the Meireki monster is the one kaiju he does not want to face on his own. Thus, Narumi's gotta quit his yammering and form the strongest close quarters tag team duo the Japanese Defense Force has ever seen. Because even if Kafka somehow survives the most recent blow he suffered, Hoshina, as his vice captain, cannot let him fight anymore, otherwise he will kick the bucket. Therefore, together, they activate number 6, 8-fold slasher and 7-branched sword. These are both of these guys' strongest attacks in their arsenal. Both are designed to finish off kaiju once and for all with a single strike. However, there is one thing they did not take into consideration when creating these specific fighting styles. They ain't the main protagonist.
You're not him.
That's right, the Meireki monster not only blocked their attacks with complete ease, but bro even cast the Andrew Tate Hustlers University domain expansion whilst he's at it. Nonetheless, things only go from bad to worse next, as the monster expands and prepares to nuke itself. However, at that moment, Kafka finds himself drowning in a deep pit of water. Weakened, he can hear everything that's happened around him. His friends are on the brink of certain doom, and so he convinces himself that he's not finished yet. He has to go back. He can't let the Meireki monster kill those he cares about, which is when suddenly a voice could be heard. Is continuing to fight what you desire. Despite the severity of your wounds, you still desire to return to the battlefield? And regardless of who it is that's speaking to him, Kafka confirms it. There is nothing more he would rather do than continue this fight. He doesn't even care what will happen to him. Thus, it's revealed that it's none other than his very own samurai ancestor who makes his presence known. In order for Kafka to continue the battle, he has to go with him and form a stronger connection with them. As a result, Kafka's consciousness is suddenly transported to hundreds of years into the past, into a battle that would change everything. This is where Kaiju No. 8 was born. An event that Kafka was allowed to witness after the little guy finally acknowledged his resolve and that their goals had crossed over: protect their loved ones from the Meireki monster. But first, the large army of Japanese samurai found themselves facing off against a Yoju on an ancient battlefield. Those charging in, however, are confused at Kafka's descendant, who suddenly seems to have gone weak in the knees. Why? Well, because it is now Kafka. He's reliving the past through his own ancestor's body and memories. But there's no time for a family reunion though. He's gotta help in the fight, even if he's armed with useless primitive weapons. Because even though their armor, spears, everything are made from kaiju, like in the modern day, the absence of science in this era means that they have a long way to go before a single human can reach the level of a daikaiju like Hoshina and Narumi. Kafka even goes on to mention that he had seen in historical records that humans used to bond directly with a kaiju's body using a parasitic kaiju tissue as a medium. Because of all these factors though, the power of the weaponry isn't just low, but the strain it puts on their bodies is far worse than that of the modern day. Because of all this, Kafka is caught out daydreaming as the Yoju goes in for an attack. In spite of this, his ass is saved by none other than Hoshina's ancestor. I guess some things never change. Now Hoshina questions why he's spacing out in a time like this, as that's not like him, which is when he tells Kafka if he doesn't get his shit together, he will make the Saru squad captain cry. This goes to show the parallels to the modern day and how even hundreds of years ago things were the same, as Kafka's ancestor had a strong relationship with the Saru squad captain, much like how Kafka does for Mina. Hoshina's ancestor was even the vice captain in this era too, as when Kafka calls him by it, he doesn't even question it. But once again, no time for a catch up, they are here to fight. And so Hoshina orders the Tora squad to fire arrows from the left, whilst the Tori squads keep leading the kaiju to the trench, where eventually, despite their primitive weaponry, they succeed. As Kafka's own ancestor says, it was a day like any other. But then, Kaiju No. 9 ruined the celebrations entirely, changing the course of history forever. Because you see, suddenly, bodies all around them went flying into the air, torn to tiny pieces left, right and center. The Yoju they had just faced was back. But it wasn't just any old Yoju anymore, it was the Meireki monster. Humanity was helpless. Now, it's important to remember some of Kaiju No. 9's special abilities here, as it gives us a clue as to why this was his doing. And to begin with, we gotta go back to when he first unlocked these powers, starting with chapter 114, as that was where it all began. We saw in his flashback that he was merely a frail kaiju who could rely solely on his intelligence to survive, something unique to No. 9. But one day when faced with a human, he had to react fast in order to survive, and so using his innate desire to learn, No. 9 mimicked the man's gun and shot him. This was the very first ability we ever saw him use back in chapter 6, which we now know was also the first ability he ever learned. But then we were introduced to some more of the techniques he had learned, one of which being the ability to resurrect recently killed kaiju, and another being the ability to shapeshift, taking on the appearance of others, including humans. But regardless, after unlocking his powers, killing that man hundreds of years ago, we know that Kaiju number 9 went on to absorb a priest. The man he killed wielded a gun, which were introduced into Japan by the Portuguese, meaning this would be at the very earliest the 1500s, 100 years before the Meireki era where Kaiju number 8 was born. But what's important to remember here is that firearms were not the only thing that the Portuguese introduced to Japan. They also brought with them Christianity. And so it makes sense that in the lineup of previous hosts that Kaiju number 9 had, we see a priest before we see a samurai. This implies that Kaiju number 9 stumbled upon what would later be known as the Meireki monster 100 years before its first attack on humanity deep within a cave. This is key to remember as it completely recontextualizes chapter 117 in its entirety, because we see Kafka's Ancestor explain that the Meireki monster randomly appeared from within a body, which sounds eerily similar to number 9's shape-shifting ability. Thus, everything lines up for it to be that number 9 was actually disguised as the Japanese soldier samurai during this battle to get his hands on a dead Yoju so that he could revive it using his other ability and merge with it, like we've seen him do with other kaiju such as the Ant Kaiju. Then, like we see in the modern day, the Meireki monster took control, going on a rampage. Even with Kafka declaring he will face this kaiju alone, he's instantly met with a reality check, where with just a single swing, it annihilates tens of hundreds of soldiers. It didn't matter how fast a soldier was or how strong they were. It didn't even matter if they had the strongest close quarters combatant of all time in Hoshina's Ancestor, who just so happens to be Kaiju number 9's next victim. That's right, we saw in chapter 104 that 9 went after the strongest of each generation, and so as for the Meireki era, after the monster impaled Hoshina's Ancestor, he, like Isao, was absorbed and trapped within. Even back during those chapters when Mina saw the conglomerate of different kaiju inside, what she really saw was the Meireki monster. Everyone was equally doomed on this battlefield in front of the Meireki monster, even Kafka's Ancestor. From there, the monster continued to destroy everything the humans had spent their lives creating, and before they knew it, a great fire covered the land. The homes they were supposed to go back to that night, the families they loved, all of it gone. Now, those with the notification bell on will know that this was a real event. Well, kinda. There was no real kaiju attack. However, there was a great fire. This historical event, fittingly named the Great Fire of Meireki, was a massive fire that broke out in Edo, aka Tokyo, in 1657. It was one of the deadliest in Japanese history, lasting for 3 days, killing around 100,000 people and destroying about 2/3 of Edo's total population. Funnily enough, it was caused by a priest who tried burning a cursed kimono, where the fire soon spread all across the land. Who in the story of Kaiju number 8 do we know has ties to a priest? Of course, number 9. Furthermore, the events of the Great Fire of Meireki forced upon the people of Edo the importance of urban planning and fire prevention. In the manga, however, this urban planning will be replaced by the improvement of the kaiju combat suits, eventually leading to the ones we see in the modern day, whilst the fire prevention will be instead, of course, kaiju prevention. All starting with what happens next. Because as we see Kafka's Ancestor fall deep into the water, singing helplessly the same way Kafka was left after the Meireki monster destroyed him, we suddenly hear voices reaching out to us. The shame! All the powerless souls that had died in the great battle of Meireki against this powerful kaiju began swarming Kafka's Ancestor, which ultimately gave birth to none other than Kaiju number 8. That's right, like the powerless insects that they were, they merged together to form the little guy. But how and why? Well, we learn in chapter 117 that the battle suits these samurai wore were powered by none other than parasitic kaiju tissue. Thus, when all the dead samurai came together, their anger and despair latched onto an ideal genetic host in Kafka's own Ancestor. And because the souls are attached within, it explains how and why Kafka and others could see see previous hosts when using kaiju weaponry as they merge together almost at a genetic level. It's also why the little guy purposefully seeked out Kafka right in chapter 1. All of this ties into the many parallels between Kaiju number 8 and 9. Whilst the little guy was created by the despair and failure of many humans whose desire is to kill kaiju and reclaim their land, giving them the ability to cause degeneration with its own attacks. 9 on the other hand uses other kaiju created by its desire to push forward and learn, wiping out humans, reclaiming its own species from them using its ability to regenerate the dead. The question is, if Kaiju number 8 and 9 are so similar, including their levels of intelligence being able to speak, furthermore the fact that we now know that the little guy was born from humans, does this mean that 9 was as well? Does he originate from a man or men hellbent on unlocking the secrets of the world, birthing his interest in learning? Regardless, the imagery of Kafka falling into the water and Kaiju number 8 also being born in it is fitting, aligning with the well-known theory of the primordial soup, where early Earth had a soup of simple chemicals in its waters. Scientists think that energy from sources like lightning, volcanic activity, and sunlight could have triggered chemical reactions within this soup. Then over time, these reactions created the building blocks of life, where the chemical reactions in this case was the despair of all the samurai. Now, whilst you sit patiently and wait for a chemical reaction of your own to create life, maybe check this video out on your screen right now.